Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Jacob Jewett. Today we're starting the CompTIA A+ exam certification series. I'm basing this series off the current published exam, which is the A+ 220-901 and the A+ 220-902. I'm going to use one book in particular as being my foundation of how I build these videos. And that book is published by Pearson IT Certification, and it's called the CompTIA A+ 220-901 and the 220-902 Cert Guide, and its author is Mark Edward Soper. This is a great book to start with. And I, again, highly recommend it. I'll have links in the description to this book through Safari Books Online, and I'll also include links in the description to either rent or purchase the book through Amazon, or also you can go to Barnes & Noble and pick it up if you need a physical book, if learning through the computer on a computer screen is not cohesive to you. I highly suggest that you don't only use my videos as like a shortcut to preparation of the exam. These videos, the book I'm referencing, are just two resources to preparing for the exam. To be totally prepared for the exam, you need to check out CompTIA's website and look up the published objectives for the A+ exam. CompTIA publishes this on their website for free, and you can access it at any time. And I highly suggest that you do that frequently in preparation for the exam. And the reason why I say this is because CompTIA can change the exam at any given time. It's their exam. They can update it, they can add a new objective, and you won't know about it unless you check the objectives. So I would check the objectives on CompTIA's website before you begin learning. I would print them out, and as you learn, as you go through whatever video series, whether it's mine or someone else's, that you go through those objectives and mark them off as you learn them, as you gain the competency that you think that you're prepared for the exam. As you get closer to your exam date, I would print out a new current version of the objectives. The high likeliness of them changing them so vastly that you'll fail the exam if you don't do this is very minimal, but that little extra edge is just enough to put you over the top. If you're close to not passing, maybe that one objective that they add or they change a little bit will give you enough to get over the top of the required score. So while it happens in other industries, in this industry in particular, our certification guides usually always start with the first chapter that covers just an overview of what the rest of the book is about. So, and that's not passed by in this book. This book, very much so, the first chapter, chapter 1, is an overview of what the rest of the book is about. So in this chapter, we cover things like computers and mobile devices, hardware and software and firmware, CompTIA 6-step troubleshooting theory, tools and equipment and important websites. And I'm reading that off of a whiteboard, as you could probably tell, but that is literally the structure of the first chapter of this book. And I'll cover those items in this video in that order, so that if you're reading the book and you're watching my videos, you can pretty much follow along. I don't want it to lose you at any point. The information I provide, a lot of it will match the chapter not word for word. That would be copyright infringement and plagiarism, and I don't plan on doing that, at least not on purpose. But I will reference things in the book as well as give you my own spin on it. I feel that in preparation for exam, or even if you're not planning to take the exam and you're just really genuinely wanting to learn the craft that is IT, multiple viewpoints is very helpful. So we're going to cover this. I don't have a lot of hardware with me, so I'm going to do it through showing you pictures and describing things to you, but we'll follow along here, and hopefully you find this video very helpful. So as a professional technician, one of the first things that we should be able to do is to identify the different components of a computer, whether it be the external connections of the computer called the I/O ports, that stands for input and output ports, or it be the internal components of the computer, i.e. the CPU, RAM, or hard drives. Or even down to what's considered the form factor of the motherboard. The last thing you want to do as a technician is go into a customer's location, look at what they have as far as a computer, and turn to them and go, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. That's a terrible thing to do. They're hiring you to come in and be the expert, so you should be able to look at different ports and be able to identify not only what kind of port it is, but usually what standard it's following. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to briefly show you different ports on typical computers and laptops and mobile devices, and kind of give you just an overview of what those ports are. Now, we're not going to go into any kind of real detail here because, again, this chapter is an overview. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just point out the ports. I'm going to tell you basic differences on the ports. I'm also going to cover the concept of legacy and what that means to you as a technician. So here we go. We're going to go on first. I'm going to first show you a desktop computer. So here we have a typical desktop computer. This is what they call an aftermarket computer. All these on this screen are aftermarket cases. These particular ones are by Corsair, except for the last one. The last one, I don't know the manufacturer of that case, but it's still basically an OEM, or OEM stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer, or it's an aftermarket. Aftermarket is something that's produced for you to buy, not manufactured all in one piece. All in one piece devices are considered OEM, okay, Original Equipment Manufacturers. So on these pictures here, the two main pictures I have here, I got a desktop here, and I got a desktop or tower here. And we have our front access ports. Now, not much is different between these two front access ports. You have a couple of USB connections, you have audio connections, and your power on and restart buttons here. And on this one you have activity lights, which is kind of nice. The activity lights on this case may be like under the power button, so if you press the power button it lights up instead of this lighting up here. But what we need to identify here is we have USB ports here. USB ports stands for Universal Serial Bus. There's many different versions of USB ports. I think we're up to, as of this video, I believe it's version 3.1. But we have different standards of USB ports. Anything below a version 3 USB port would be considered either a version 2 or version 1 USB port or standard. And those are typically, you can identify those typically by a black color on the plastic part of the connector. You'll see that here, and you'll also see that here on these USB ports here. A USB 3.0 or higher typically will have different shades of blue. A 3.0 USB port will have like a light blue color to it, and typically a 3.1 port will have a darker blue color to it. Some manufacturers have gone off the tracks and they'll actually include USB ports that have different colors because they don't feel like following a standard. They'll have like a green color or so on and so forth. So you just need to be careful. What you need to really be able to do is look at the port and be able to go, okay, this is USB 3 because I see that color blue. If it's a different color, like for example the green that I spoke about earlier, because you have some manufacturer that's just gone off the rails, usually it will be given a designation and a logo above it. This here is an example of a USB version 3 logo for that, designating a universal serial port, so that, or sorry, universal serial bus. And that's what this designates here. Is it's a universal connection, and it uses a serial communication, and it's an actual bus. Most of these ports you can, last time I remember, you can connect like 127 devices to a single USB port. That goes a little crazy, but it's capable of connecting a ton of devices. Also, from version 1 and 2 to version 3, there's a transfer rate that almost doubles, if not triples, in the difference between the two ports. So that's why there's importance between being able to identify which is which. Here you have some audio ports. So audio ports here and audio ports here, and then on the back of the computer on the I/O shield you have some additional audio ports. This is a microphone port, and this is a headphones or speaker port. You'll see that you have the same ports here and the same ports here. These ports here are identified by a image rather than a color, where these are identified by colors. One of the things that you need to know about front access ports versus the back of the computer access ports is typically on a computer that has front access ports, if you plug in your sound on the front, typically it will disable the one on the back. I've had a couple of customers call me in the past where they've connected like earphones on the front, and they'll be done using their earphones and put them to the side, and they'll go to use their computer's external speakers and can't figure out why it's not playing audio. Typically, again, it's because the headphones are still plugged in, and all you have to do is unplug them, and it's fine. You have your restart switch here and your power switch here, and you'll see the two here as well. So yeah, again, you need to be able to identify and differentiate the ports on the computer. Now also on this computer, on the I/O shield back here, you're going to see some additional connections. The I/O shield is really where you get the most connections directly to the motherboard of the computer. The motherboard of the computer is what connects everything together. So the motherboard is the one component on the computer that connects the CPU, the RAM, the expansion boards, and so on and so forth. So this is your main point of contact. On the back of this computer, you see that there's some connection ports here, some what we call display ports down here. The problem is this is an expansion card, and sometimes what happens is you'll have an expansion video card, and you'll have a video monitor or a computer monitor connected to this additional video card, and you'll turn on the computer and not see any images or any what we call post screen. If that happens, the first thing you should do is disconnect your computer here from your monitor here and plug it into like a display port here, or even use the DVI connection or the VGA connection, so that when you turn on the computer, you're connected directly to the computer's motherboard and there's no in-between device. So if you connect directly to the computer's motherboard and you still don't have video, you got other issues going on, and we'll cover that later. But on here, you're going to see that we have a couple legacy connections. Now, anything that's a legacy connection is something that's once was standard and widely used, but has been outdated, meaning it's been replaced by a newer technology. So on this motherboard, we see on this back I/O shield, we see a PS2 port, which was basically surpassed by what we call USB ports. And USB ports can be now used for your keyboard and mouse, whereas this PS2 port used to serve that purpose. On this I/O shield, we have 3 different types of video connections. We have a display port here. We have a DVI connection here, which is a digital video connection or digital video interface. And then we have a VGA port here, which is called a DB15, meaning it's got 15 connection pins on it. You'll see 5 here, 5 here, and 5 here, total 15. This is analog, and it's the old style port. This is one of the, not the original video port, but it definitely has been around for a long time. And this video port will actually send analog video to your monitor. Down here, this is digital, meaning it sends digital information to your monitor, and so is this. So what's really cool about a display port is you can get dongles for this. A dongle is like a connection that connects into this and converts to a different connection, or makes multiple of the same connection. You can get a dongle for this connection and actually make it a VGA port or a DVI. That's what's really nice about display port connections. Again, we'll describe those in further detail later on in future videos. Here we have a RJ45 connector. They come in different versions. Typically in this day and age, these are what's called gig network connections, or 1,000 megabits per second connections. These are also legacy in the way that they're backwards compatible, meaning just like a USB port is, like if I have a USB port 3.0, it's backwards compatible to USB port 2.0 or USB port 1. Typical network connections will be backwards compatible to like 100 megabits per second, or sometimes even 10 megabits per second. God only knows why someone would want to still be connecting at 10 megabits per second, but typically you're looking here at like either 100 megabits per second or 1,000 megabits per second. What the hell am I talking about? Well, again, we'll talk about that in future videos. Moving on, we got the inside of a computer. Now, the inside of the computer, in this book that I'm using to cover this video series, they have a picture of a desktop computer with an open side on it, and it's got quite possibly the worst wire management in it ever. Let's just put it this way. If you built a computer like that nowadays, like the one that's actually depicted in the book, you would be the laughing stock of just about any tech out there. Nowadays, we're really concerned about airflow through the computer, and airflow is how air enters the front of the computer or the bottom of the computer or any vent on the computer, and how it flows over the different heat emitting devices on the computer or on the motherboard and gets expelled out of the back of the computer. Typical airflow through a computer is like through the front and out the back, or through the bottom and front and side, out the top, or in the back. It totally depends on the type of case you have. So on this demonstration image that I have, we have what's called a mini ATX motherboard. This is a mini ATX form factor motherboard. And when you look inside of a computer, you should be able to visually identify the location of different items on the motherboard. For example, here on this motherboard, we should be able to identify the main power connection. Okay, a 24-pin connection here for the main power. Here you got a couple connections. These are more likely for the front panel of this computer. Down here we have our SATA connections, or SATA connections. And then we have a old style, what they call PCI connector here. And then we have our video connector. This looks to be, it's kind of covered by the video card. This is a video card right here. This particular video card is covering this port, but that looks to me like a PCIe connection. Whether it's version 8 or 16 is kind of hard to see. But that connection below there, you should be able to identify. Here you got another PCI E connection. This looks like a version 4 connector. And what's the difference between a times, I'm saying version 4, but I mean times 4 or times 16 or times 8? It will describe that again in future videos. Here we have what's called the south bridge, and then typically up here we have the north bridge. We have our memory sticks, or RAM. We have our MOSFET connections here, which are typically our power diodes for the CPU. Under this heatsink and fan would be what we call our CPU, or central processing unit. And so again, you need to be able to look at a motherboard and identify the different connections, the different locations of items on that motherboard. Here we have a cooling fan. We have a power supply down here. We have a hard drive here. And we have the side view of what looks like an optical drive. Now, believe it or not, optical drives, also known as CD-ROM or DVD-ROM or Blu-ray disc drives, are now considered in the computer world as being legacy, meaning we allow for backwards compatibility connections to them, but there are some cases that you buy nowadays that don't even have openings for a CD-ROM drive. That's how far away we are from these. We've replaced, for the most part in the IT industry, we've replaced optical drives with like USB flash drives. Okay, moving from a setup where I had PowerPoint and showing you the inside of a computer, mostly because I'm too lazy to take my personal computer apart and show you that. Hence I'm doing these videos off that computer, so that'd be kind of counterproductive. I used PowerPoint to show you that, so instead of using PowerPoint to show you a laptop, since I got some with me, I figured I would show you some of the ports on a laptop and how they relate to a desktop computer. So this is a Toshiba, and this laptop belongs to a friend of mine. He actually had me working on it for him, so hey, he got free work, so I'm going to use his laptop as a demonstration. So on this laptop, we have a couple of connections. We have, on the front of the laptop, we have a memory card reader, and this it looks like this memory card reader uses a few different standards. It uses SD. It looks like Sony's memory card, and it looks here to be an XD card. And the reason why I know this is, again, it's got the symbols. So this is a multi-card reader, meaning it can use multiple different types of memory cards that you put in here. These typically are like a flash kind of card that you would use on a camera. This is a FireWire connection here, also known as a believe it's a 3400 connection. It's been a while since I've used Firewire. Firewire was a standard by Apple, and Sony and cameras typically used this connection as well. We'll definitely look into that further. It's been a while since I've seen this connection, but that's something you need to know as well, because sometimes you'll go and help out a customer and they'll have an old laptop. For example, this is considered a pretty old laptop. This laptop here is probably 10 to I would say 10 years old. One of the things that usually gets my customers in trouble is this little stupid switch right here. And this switch is a Wi-Fi switch. It manually turns on and off the Wi-Fi card in the computer. By flipping this switch, you can turn off wireless. It's like putting your laptop in airplane mode. If you were to take your laptop on a flight with you, they used to tell you that you had to turn off wireless devices. They still do, I think, for takeoff and landing, but you're allowed to use your wireless devices typically now when you're up at altitude. So they have this nice, on this model, they have this nice little convenient switch. The problem with these switches is when you turn it off, a lot of times that card, the wireless card on the computer, will actually not even show up. It'll disconnect the card completely depending on the model of laptop. And I've had calls from customers where they accidentally bump this into the off position, and they'll call me talking about how their wireless isn't working, and I'll ask them, hey, is there a switch? Do you see a switch on the laptop? And sometimes I'll have a customer that will find the switch and turn it back on, and they're, hey, it works, there it is. But other times I'll have a customer that doesn't find the switch or doesn't want to bother looking, and they'll call me out for a service call, and I'll go there, I'll be there less than 5 minutes, find the switch it on, and basically say thank you and see you later kind of thing. I typically don't charge customers for that kind of call, but just know that this typically is a problem. In newer laptops, you don't see this anymore. Sometimes what you'll see is, instead of a physical switch like that, you'll see this like on the F8 key, you'll see a little wireless button here. And typically, to turn on and off your wireless, you would hit the FN key and you would press that button to turn on and off the wireless. And usually there's some kind of visual indication that you're doing that. Most new laptops will only have that option versus having the switch on the front of the laptop. If we look to my right of the laptop, you'll see that we have an optical drive. Optical drives on older laptops are always present. Sometimes on newer laptops, like what we consider ultrabooks, those are thinner laptops like the one I have here from work. This is a Surface Pro 4, or Surface Pro 3 by Microsoft, and as you can see, there's a vast difference in the size of laptop, and let me get that more into screen for you. But there's definitely a difference in size between those laptops there. So I'm going forward, so we can use a little less time, use both side by side so you can see the differences. So here again, we have the optical drive. We also, on this laptop, have what's called a PCIe card slot. This is an old PCI standard where you would actually use these external cards that you would plug in to add functionality to the laptop, basically allowing for expandability of the laptop. Whether it was like you wanted, sometimes you could get hard drives that would actually fit in there, like a card that was a hard drive itself, or even a big memory, basically memory stick kind of card, or wireless network card. It's basically just an expansion slot for a laptop. In the same way that on a desktop, you have expansion slots for desktops. Here we have a USB port. This looks, I would almost bet you that this is a USB version 1 because this laptop is definitely old enough for that. It could possibly be a USB version 2, but I'm going to go with 1 on that one. Here we have our network connection. On that we have RJ45 connection. And then here we have what's called the RJ11 connection. And that's for old phone cables, like old wired phones. And this is actually a modem. A modem is a modulator, demodulator, and basically allows you to communicate with other computers via what's called an analog signal over a phone line. So a little bit too much deep into that, but that's considered legacy. Most new laptops, you won't see this port. For that matter, you won't even see this port. If you look at my Surface I have here, there is no port. There is no port for a network connection. It has built-in wireless, just like this laptop does. Definitely a newer version of wireless, but you can get network ports for the Surfaces, but they're like a dongle that plug into a USB port rather than having it built in. As you see, there's a lot less space versus this one. Okay. If we look at the back, typically you'll only see your hinges here. On the back of this, on the back of the Toshiba here, we have our power port. And the thing you need to know about power connections on laptops is typically they're proprietary, meaning if you got a Toshiba laptop, it's going to require a Toshiba power supply. If you try to take like a HP power supply for an HP laptop and try to plug it into a Toshiba, most of the time it's not even going to fit into that port. And they may use the same power consumption, but this is one thing that's kind of remained proprietary among vendors. And you'll see the power port for this Surface is a lot different than the power port here. If we go to the left side of the computer, we see that we have some additional ports. For the Surface, we see that our power port is right here. This is a magnetic power port, meaning the power supply connects to it using a magnetic source, which is a new kind of development for us in computers. It used to be that you didn't want magnets anywhere near the computer when you were connecting it. It's always a bad idea because in old style hard drives like the one that is here, typically magnets were a bad idea. You have your audio ports here. You'll see that you have looks like your microphone there and your headphones here, and then of course a volume control and your USB ports. If you look at this Surface, I have two ports other than my power supply port, and this is a USB 3.0 port, and then right next to it you have a display port connection. Display ports are kind of cool, especially this one here. This type of display port, you can actually connect it, and you can have it come out as a VGA connection like this, or you can get it to come out as a HDMI connection, or even a DVI connector. I actually have the dongles for this, and maybe in a future video I'll show you those connections. Now, on this computer, you see that there's audio port. There's two audio ports, one for the microphone, one for headphones. This Surface also has audio port, but it's right here. And this audio port is a multi-audio port, meaning it also works for a microphone and for a headphones. You can actually plug in something like a headphone setup you would get for your iPhone or something like that, plug it in here, and it will work with the microphone built onto the headphones. And then you have your volume control. So obviously newer computers use a lot more buttons versus the old dial setup. You have your exhaust fan fins here, and on the Surface computer, you'll see that there's exhaust fan ports here. A lot less heat dissipation on this versus this. This old laptop will get a lot hotter versus this any day of the week. So one thing that old computers have, like this Toshiba, is you'll see on this Toshiba, it has a front-facing camera. Now the front-facing camera is right here, and this is a whopping 1.3 megapixel. So we can definitely tell that it's old. And boy, does that screen need to be cleaned. Yeah, that's a fun one. So there's a typical laptop for you. On the Surface, what's nice here is we have a back-facing camera, and you have your microphone sensors here. And then if I open up the Surface, you'll see that I have a front-facing camera with a light sensor next to it. That's what that is. Typically, that light sensor is used to make the screen get lighter or darker depending on where you're at. There's a lot more new technology when it comes to this stuff. Here, this is a touch screen versus the laptop, which is not a touch screen. So you can see I can move that around there. Most tablet type computers are now touch screens. You also have here the Windows key. If I were logged on, I could use that. And you can see that a Surface can convert into, of course, a laptop. And then you have your connections down below. This Surface may be breathing for air because I think that since I got this Surface at work, that's probably the first time I've taken the keyboard off of it. I typically only use this Surface for work, but as you can see, a lot smaller, a lot less power consumption. This Surface will last 10 hours typically versus this, which on battery would be lucky if we lasted about 2 hours to maybe 3 hours. So that's laptops for you. So something new in the A+ exam is they actually now cover mobile devices as being something that they test on, and to a certain extent, usually what they're going to test you on in a mobile device on the A+ exam is going to be able to locate different connectors and also different parts of that particular model cell phone or mobile device. Like, again, there's so many mobile devices out there that it's going to be really hard for them to expect you to know every single type of cell phone and such, but there are typical connections that are universal no matter what device you're looking at. Now, since the proliferation of iPhones is very heavy, it's a big part of Apple's income, more likely they are going to want you to point out things on an Apple iPhone. And there's a couple of things that have changed with the different versions of Apple iPhones. And I don't think they're going to test you on anything older than like an iPhone 4 because there's still people out there with iPhone 4 and iPhone 5, but there's less and less of them. They're definitely not going to test you on like a 3 or even a original iPhone. Those are too far out of date. But what I got here on this image for you is I have the older version of iPhone. This would be either this would be an iPhone 4 phone right here, and either a 4 or 4S, and it uses Apple's old connector, which is a 30-pin connector. This is a connector that was proprietary produced by Apple, and it, for the most part, had like analog audio signals and stuff like that. And as they got smaller and smaller with the phone, they could no longer fit this port, so they moved to another port called a lightning cable, and that lightning cable's here. This is an 8-pin cable. It does have 2 sides, but the 8 pins are typically they're on both sides so that you can connect this cable either way and it still works. So here we have where that firewire, where that lightning cable connects. You see that that's standard across the iPhone 5, the iPhone 6, and the iPhone 7. Okay, so that's how I have that set up here. This is a 5, and this is a 6, and this is a 7 iPhone. The differences you'll see here is in the old style iPhone, I don't have a picture of it, but in the iPhone 4, the audio port for the audio connection for your headphones or your headphones / microphone is actually at the top of the phone. It's on the top of this iPhone. And on the iPhone 5, they moved the audio port from the top of the phone to the bottom. So your charging port / communication port for the iPhone is on the bottom, as is the audio port. And then you have your audio speaker here. Okay, and I believe if I remember correctly, this is a microphone and this is the speaker. It's a mono speaker setup, meaning it only uses like the left audio channel for this. So that would be the mono connection here, or the mono speaker. And again, your spiff connection for your headphones, and the lightning cable connector here. These screws right here is the 2 screws that you would need to take out in order to take the phone apart. Again, these are also the 2 screws that you would need to take out to take the phone apart. You see, this is a typical design of Apple. I will tell you this, anything that you work on that has the Apple logo on it typically will kill the warranty for the customer if the phone still has a warranty on it the moment you turn these screws. Apple is very particular about their warranties, and they have a lot of safe measures in there. So, for example, if your iPhone is anywhere near liquid or in a high humidity area, there's a sticker inside the phone that will actually change color and will also void the warranty. So you need to be careful with that. So again, I said that this was a microphone here. The same is true here. This is a microphone for the iPhone 4, and this is a speaker for the iPhone 4. You have the speaker here, a speaker here, and then with the iPhone 7, they went from having an audio connection port here, and a speaker not speaker, but a microphone here, and the speaker here, to go into the iPhone 7. With the iPhone 7, this is a speaker, as well as this is a speaker, and then they have their microphone built in somewhere as well. And then you have your lightning cable connection port here. What they did is, in favor for stereo speakers on the new iPhone 7, or I guess now the iPhone 7s, for to favor stereo output of speakers, they got rid of this audio port. There was a bunch of hoopla that went on about this for a while, but what Apple did is to save space and give you stereo speakers, they got rid of this port, and then they gave you a dongle that had a connection like this, that had basically the lightning cable on one side and then this port on the other side, and that would come with this cell phone. So you still had the capability of connecting your old headphones, but that really confused a lot of people and upset them. And then over here we have this is the front screen of the cell phone, the black portion here you see, and so if we were looking at the front of the cell phone, this would be your left, this would be your right. Now on the iPhone 4, iPhone 5, iPhone 6 and 7, and all the previous versions, the one thing that the couple things that Apple has kept consistent is that your home button exists, which this button here is the button that the user can press, and that will take them to their home screen every time, or turn on the phone, or a multitude of things, get them out of an application, so on and so forth. You'll see that home button here and here. In the iPhone 6 and 7, they actually changed that home button. It is still a home button, but it actually has a fingerprint sensor on it to allow for easy access to your phone. But the other thing that they've kept consistent on the iPhone through each version is the location of the buttons on the side of the phone. So it doesn't matter what version of the iPhone you get, you're going to see this consistent across the board. So here you have your buttons here that are your audio volume up and volume down buttons. It can also be considered mute, because if you go volume down all the way, it'll actually mute your phone and turn it on vibrate. This button here is by default is the silence button, or not button, sorry, switch. So you would switch this down and it would automatically put your phone into a silent mode, where it uses the inner motor to create vibrations for you rather than sound. Here's your power button. This is also known as a standby button. You press this button when you want your phone to go into like a standby mode, basically turning off your screen and waiting for a phone call. Also, if you get stuck in an application, you can actually press this button and hold it, and it will if you hold it for like 10 seconds, it will turn off the phone completely. You have your camera. This is an iPhone 7 right here. So you'll see that this has got a double camera. They're doing some neat stuff with this. This is also your rear-facing microphone, and also your flash that's built into the phone. Different models have the flash and the microphone located in different locations, but this is typical of a iPhone. I didn't include all the versions because, well, I'm sure if you got a cell phone, there's a 50-50 chance it's an iPhone. Going on to what we call Android devices. Android devices typically have a flavor of operating system from Google called Android, and those are on multiple phone devices that aren't iPhone. There's 3 different types of phones out there right now, or well, 4 different types of phones out there right now that use different operating systems. You have your Samsungs and your HTCs and your other phone manufacturers that use Android type operating system on them. And then you have your iPhones out there that use what's called iOS. And the iOS version depends on the phone that you're using and how far it's been used. But so you have iOS on your iPhone, and then you have on Android devices the Android operating system. And then some phones also release proprietary versions of an operating system, basically their own flavor of an operating system for their cell phone. And these are typically like the cheaper phones, are otherwise known as Obama phones. Those phones have their own operating systems. Sometimes it depends on the carrier on whether those get updated or not. And those ones, you may want to know the different connectors on those phones, but you're typically not going to get tested on them in an A+ exam. Another operating system that's out there now, and I haven't seen any material on it yet for the A+ exam, but that's the Microsoft phones, what they call the Microsoft mobile phones. That usually uses a flavor of the newest operating system that Microsoft has. For example, Windows 10, or in an older Windows mobile phone, you will see a Windows 8 kind of a tile-looking operating system on it. So here we have a Samsung phone. I got the front view for you, and then I have the opened up view. This is what Samsung looks like when you open up the back. And you'll see that you have the battery compartment. Here you have your SIM and micro SD card connectors here, or slots for that. You have your light sensors and microphones. This is a back-facing microphone right here, /speaker. Then you'll see that you have your camera as well. And some of the newer Samsungs are kind of cool because they're somewhat water resistant. So you'll see this like rubber ring here around here, and that just provides some water resistance to the phone. It's not 100% waterproof, but it adds some resistance. And whereas the iPhone, it even looks at water, and your warranty's void. Here you'll see that you have screws that you can undo to open up the phone. Again, there's another screw there. Anytime you open a mobile device, you take a high possibility that you're avoiding a manufacturer's warranty. So always be very careful. The same thing can also be said about desktop computers. If you don't have a custom-built computer like I do here, or you have a Dell, or you have a HP, sometimes they'll put a sticker on the back of the computer that's a security sticker, and if you break that sticker, it will void the warranty on the computer for the customer. So you always need to be sure to let the customer know that if you see one of those stickers, you need to inform the customer that by breaking that sticker or cutting through that sticker, you have voided any warranty that they have on that computer. When it comes to an Apple computer, the best thing to do is, if it's a hardware change or a hardware repair on an Apple computer, you need to make sure that you talk to the customer and find out if that computer is under warranty or not. If it's not under warranty, you can take your chances and open it up. However, you need to know that Apple does not support any computer that's been broken open by a unauthorized service provider, or even by the customer. And you'll notice that when you take an Apple computer apart, the screws are all different sizes and very confusing. So it's almost like you have to have like a screw map on where things are. Also, here I have an iPad, and I'm not going to take it out of the case, but typically an iPad will still have your typical same connections as like an iPhone. Here you'll see that you have your home button / fingerprint sensor. On the side, you'll see that there's volume controls, and also camera and flash on this particular iPad. This is an iPad Pro. I got the Pro because I do a lot of reading on it. I find that iPads are very good for consumption devices. Those are Microsoft words, by the way. They always considered that iPads were consumption devices rather than creation devices. They've since changed their view on them, because now you can get Microsoft Office on your iPad and create documents and stuff like that, as well as on Adobe software. Some Adobe software will run on the iPad now, and you can create. So on this iPad Pro, you'll see that there's speakers up above. There's my audio connection here for if I want to connect headphones or headphones slash sorry, this case is being a pain. iPhone, I'm sorry. You'll see that the audio connection here, I can use it for either my headphones or I can use it for the microphones as well. So, and then down below on the bottom, we'll see that we have the connection. Dang it. We'll see that we have the connection for our lightning cable for charging, and also we have 2 audio ports here. Now the nice thing that the iPad Pro has, and I don't use it, but if I were to take this case off of it, there's actually a connector on the side to where I can use Apple docking devices, and also the Apple keyboard that comes with, it doesn't come with the iPad Pro, but you can purchase it separately. The other thing you could do with the iPad Pro as well is you can use a stylist. So those are our main devices that we use when it comes to a plus exam, and the chances that you will be tested on them are pretty high. But again, don't be too concerned on everything there is with mobile devices. More likely they're going to test you on like what kind of port is the power connector, where is the power button, things like that. Again, it's really hard to test on mobile devices, aside from like iPhone, iPad, and all that stuff, because there's so many different flavors of mobile devices out there. They'll ask you about it, and just be prepared for it. So next we're going to talk about hardware, software, and firmware. Not in that particular order, but we need to define them. We need to understand the differences between them, okay? So we're going to start off with hardware. Now, hardware is any physical component you can touch, okay? Like you can hold it in your hands. A keyboard is considered hardware. It's a peripheral, meaning it's connected to the computer outside of the computer, but it's still hardware. I can touch it, okay? A video card is hardware. A CD-ROM is hardware. A hard drive is hardware. The motherboard is hardware. Again, anything that you can physically touch. Firmware is specialized software, okay, that is hard-coded on a chip, okay, like a flash chip. Example of firmware would be a CMOS or BIOS program that's encoded on a flash ROM, okay? And we talk about BIOS and stuff like that in CMOS in the next chapter. But what you need to understand about firmware is it is a program that does not change, that's written on a chip. In newer devices, we can update firmware, meaning we can rewrite it, because we have new technology where we can. It used to require that you use special tools to rewrite firmware, but usually firmware is something that comes from the factory, a program that comes from a factory. For example, on a hard drive. A hard drive is a piece of hardware that has a chip on it that is firmware that tells the hard drive how to operate, okay? When you get power and you spin up, this is where the sectors and different information on the hard drive exist in these locations. If you sweep your reading head, over here, you're going to find that there's this track here, and that's all determined with firmware. Again, firmware is anything that's a program that's written on a device or a piece of hardware that is not changed. It is left alone, okay? Software is any application or program that you install on the computer, okay? So an operating system or OS is considered software, okay? It is stored on a hard drive. It is read by the hard drive and put onto RAM, where it is accessed by the CPU to give you something on the screen, allow you to move the mouse and double click on things. Okay, that's OS or operating system, considered software. Another thing considered software would be Microsoft Office or antivirus software. Again, anything that comes on a disk, a flash drive, or downloaded from the cloud or the internet and installed on your computer via an installation program is considered software. Okay, so how do they work together? Well, I kind of already told you that in a way, because hardware by itself without firmware, okay, so hardware by itself is just a stupid device, okay, meaning if we had hardware by itself without any kind of software telling it what to do or any kind of application or program telling it what to do, okay, it would just sit there, and when we apply power to it, it would just sit there and spin, okay? It wouldn't do anything, okay? In the example, let's use a motherboard as an example. If we have a motherboard that has a CPU, RAM, and hard drive and all that stuff connected to it, if we do not have a CMOS or a BIOS program on there through the firmware, okay, when that computer gets power applied to it, it won't know what to do. It will not know where the hard drive is. It will not know where the CD-ROM drive is. It won't even know that those exist at all unless it has a program in the firmware that says, okay, when power is applied, when I get turned on, I tell the CPU, hey, guess what, buddy? You got a hard drive over here. You got a CD-ROM drive over here. This is the addressing you need to use for your RAM over here. That's what firmware does. Firmware tells the hardware what its purpose is, basically. Turn the solenoid this way, do this and that, okay? Software uses an interface. For example, if we take Windows 10, you have Windows, which is basically multiple applications. You have the OS, which has the application that is the user interface that you as a user use. Below that is what's called a kernel, and the kernel interfaces with the hardware, okay? And it basically interfaces with the firmware, going to the CMOS or whatever, and determining how to use that hardware, okay? We have other pieces of software in the computer called device drivers and things like that that work together so we can communicate with different things on the computer. That is just a brief overview of what hardware, software, and firmware is. We go into it in further detail in future videos. Again, chapter 1 is just an overview, so if you did not follow here and if you're a bit lost, don't be worried, we'll catch you up. But now let's move on to what CompTIA calls their 6-step troubleshooting theory. So the 6-step troubleshooting theory, as the name implies, is actually 6 steps. And CompTIA did put this out there, and I can almost guarantee that you're going to be tested on this heavily. They will ask you questions that are related to different steps of this theory, and they will ask you what step is this in the theory. So you need to know. They'll give you like a scenario. So-and-so is having a problem. You go to their location and you're asking them questions on what the issue is. What step of the 6-step troubleshooting theory is this? And you need to know. So make sure you put these steps to heart. And as we go through the book and as we go through these videos, we'll try to identify what step you're at in the process of establishing a theory and troubleshooting a device. So these steps, as published by CompTIA, is step 1, identify the problem. Okay, there's different ways of identifying the problem, and most of the time it has to do with you asking the customer. The worst thing you could do as a technician is go to a customer's location and not listen to the customer and just sit down and just do whatever you think is right in fixing the computer. You need to be able to identify the problem and so that you can diagnose it correctly. So typical ways that you can identify the problem is by first asking the customer and listening to them, and what we call active listening. Active listening is not stepping over the customer every time they say something. Like if they tell you that they powered on the machine and they went down to the icon in the bottom, you don't step in there and say, oh, that's the start button. Oh, you did this wrong. You really need to hear out the customer fully before you establish any kind of theory. So you need to identify what the problem is, and you do that by listening. So that's usually the first step, is you listen to the customer. You then, if you need more information, you then can ask the customer if you can connect to their system remotely, if you have those tools available to you, or if you're at the customer's location, you may ask the customer, hey, can I drive? Which in techie speak is usually, hey, can I sit down and can I do it? If the customer's telling you what's going on and you're not quite getting it and you don't think you're confident that you could sit down and repeat the issue, ask the customer to repeat the steps that they did to get the issue. For example, if they're working on Peachtree accounting software and they said, whenever I submit a transaction, I get this error. Well, ask them to sit down and ask them to try to repeat what they did before and see if that error pops up again. So, that's another way of identifying the problem. There's also things that the computer will tell you. There's this cool thing called event logs that most technicians forget about. And event logs is, especially in Microsoft Windows, which is heavily what you'll be tested on in the A+ exam, there's an area called in the control panel called event logs, or in the computer management system, and it's the tool event logs will give you application security and system logs, and it will tell you typically what the error is, or give you some kind of path to finding out what the error is. It may not tell you exactly what the issue is, but it'll give you error code, and you can search it on Google and thereby establish a theory of a probable cause. So that's our next step in the troubleshooting theory, and that's step 2, establish a theory of probable cause. And what that means is, now that we've listened to the customer in step 1 and we've gone through our own basically our own processes of finding out what the problem may be, we need to establish a theory. Basically, there's, again, multiple ways you can do this. The one way of doing this is from experience. If I sit down at a customer's computer and they tell me, hey, my computer is running super slow, it takes forever to open up an application, things like that, I can typically sit down at the computer and test for myself through step 1, seeing the slowness of the computer. And if I know my history of computers and how fast the computer should react, I can ask basic questions like, how long have you had the computer? If it's over 5 years, I may want to ask them about the hard drive. Like, have you ever had the hard drive replaced? Because physical hard drives, over time, they degrade in performance. And typically a hard drive will only last like 3 to 5 years. So that's something I will ask right away. Or if they're using multiple applications, if I sit down at the computer and I see they have like 20 windows open, yet they have the minimum required memory on the computer, like as far as RAM, it could be that they're just overloading the computer with applications. They may have like 2 gigs of RAM on that computer, and the operating system itself requires that much RAM, so therefore it's already taxed and it's using something called a page file, and that page file could be super huge and thereby slowing down the computer. So I could establish a theory by things I've looked at and go, oh, well, you need more RAM because you're already taxing your RAM. So that would be establishing a theory. The next step is that I can, after establishing my theory, I can test my theory. Now, that's step 3, test the theory to determine the cause. Okay? This can also be rounded up in the first couple steps here, is in asking the customer about what the issue may be, what caused the issue, stuff like that. In the first 3 steps, you really do the first 3 steps if you ask the questions right, if you have history with knowing that issue. If you don't, then you need to do your research. And I guess this is a good place to stop and kind of discuss this part. As a technician, there's going to be times that you're faced with issues that you haven't faced before. And there's 2 ways of handling this, especially when you're in front of a customer. Some technicians I know are know-it-alls, and I've always viewed that as a wrong approach. The worst thing you can do is think that you're a know-it-all and lead the customer in the wrong direction, because they'll always come back and bite you in the butt. So typically what I do is if I face a situation that I haven't faced before, I'm honest to the customer and I let them know, hey, I'm going to have to do some research on this. I haven't run into this issue before. Be honest with them. If you are repairing or doing a maintenance kit on their printer, like if they have like a laser printer, and you're doing a maintenance kit on it, and let's say you're transferring it from their location to your vehicle to take it back to your office to clean it out, and you drop it, don't lie to them. It was broken already. Tell them that you dropped it. Sometimes, it may be a little bit expensive, but if you do the business right and you have like errors and omissions and certain insurances that you're supposed to have as a consultant / contractor, you're protected for those mistakes. And sometimes buying a customer a new printer to replace the one that you broke is better than losing the customer. So always be honest with the customer. If you don't know something, don't be secretive of it. Don't tell the customer, oh yeah, I know. Be honest and let them know that you don't know and that you're going to look it up for them. That being said, if it's something if it's something that you're not expected to know, for example, if they're using a special kind of software that you've never seen before and it's particular to their industry, you're justified in a way of charging them a minimal fee to study that, because it's not something that you're expected to know as a technician. You will have those instances where a customer is using a piece of software that you've never seen before, and they want you to learn it to be able to support them. You can be honest with them and say, look, I've never touched this software before, it's going to take me time to learn it. Give them a quote and say, hey, this is what it's going to take. You can also do the other side of the coin. If it's a piece of software that you've never touched before, but you see it as a value, meaning that you can support the customer there and by getting more billable hours in the future, why not learn that software? Why not learn it for free? That's a future opportunity for you. So don't hesitate to learn the customer software. And you also need to know the most likely software that people are using out there. Like, as a technician, you should know Microsoft Office. You should know things about Adobe software. You should know how to use a web browser. These are things that you should know. And if you don't know it, if you don't know something about it, you can't justify charging a customer to learn about it, because that's something that you should know. Okay? So going back to the 6-step troubleshooting theory, we've identified the problem, we've established the theory of probable cause, and then step 3, we test the theory and determine the cause. So we can test the theory, and usually testing the theory, you can typically, if you know what the issue is, or you see something on like Google or a KB article and it looks similar to your issue, and you go through the steps, you could test it and see if it works. So testing the theory is, I need to go into the registry and I need to change this line of code because this is a typical problem. You would want to back up that registry and make the change, restart the computer, test it, and if it fixes the problem, then you're good. Okay? But don't leave it at that. Don't half-ass things. Always make sure you test it thoroughly, because nothing's worse than going to fix a problem for a customer, and then as you leave the site, they're calling you on the phone because it popped up after you left. Or you get called out a ton of times to fix the same issue over and over and over again. That makes you look bad. That also makes the customer start looking at other technicians. And weird thing about that is it also makes our industry look bad, because the next technician that goes in, the first thing that customer is going to say to that new technician that comes in is, well, I had the last guy look at it and he told me he had it fixed, and I just don't believe anything that you're going to say. I've had that happen, and I've had to prove myself, and you'll find it happens to you as well. So continuing on our steps, so far we've gone over identify the problem, which is step 1. Step 2, establish a theory and probable cause. Step 3, test the theory and determine the cause. And step 4, establish a plan, action, and resolve the problem, implement a solution. So establish a plan, it totally depends on what kind of issue you're looking at, on whether you write out a full plan. Okay? But you need a plan, have a notebook or something with you, and actually write it down. And don't be afraid to build a tech community, other friends that you know that are in the industry as well. And if you need to, call them and verify with them. And if all else fails, a call to Microsoft and a Microsoft service call that costs $70 or $75 per call, but that's unlimited amount of time. That's cheaper than sitting there and messing up something and leaving the customer stuck without their information or stuck without their computer. Especially if you're dealing with a business customer, they usually need to be back up and running very quickly. So next step in this is we would verify full system functionality, and if applicable, implement preventative measures. So in step 5, what you're going to do is you're going to verify that everything functions the way it's supposed to. And what I mean by that is you don't only verify the software or the one thing that the customer showed you. Verify other things in the system as well, like spot check things, because sometimes a change you make in one place on the system can affect something else, okay, and can cause other issues. So always check, because again, the last thing you want to do is be called out again to the same customer for the same issue. Sometimes the way you get around this is you have the customer sit down at the computer and you have them repeat what they showed you before and verify with you that the issue is now solved. Another thing that you can do is it says in that step, if applicable, implement preventative measures. If you, for example, go out to a customer and the customer has a virus on their computer, and you sit there for an hour or two and clean up the computer and get rid of the virus, you may want to implement a virus scanning solution for them, from another vendor or something like that. Of course, you always let the customer know before you install anything, but you may want to talk to the customer and get a plan in place to protect them from future infection. I will tell you this, in this industry, if you have aversion to porn, you're in the wrong industry. I know that porn is taboo, but 9 out of 10 computers that I've seen come into my company when I had my own company, and 9 out of 10 computers that I've seen as a technician working on a computer has had some kind of porn on it, or some kind of the user has looked at porn one time or another. Sometimes those sites that they go to are unreputable and not very good, right? So you can't say to the customer, oh, the reason why your computer's all messed up is because you were looking at porn. You will embarrass the customer. More likely you won't keep the customer for long if you embarrass them. So always be very careful on how you approach the subject. But if they're going to porn or something like that, and you get called out constantly because their computer's infected or loaded up with it, then sometimes you can approach the subject very lightly, but say, I've even gone as far before. I had this one customer, I kid you not, every time I went out to the customer's location, the computer was totally inundated with viruses and loaded up. And every time I would fix the computer and try to research why it got infected, porn across the board. I mean, just tons of porn, and on just really bad sites. And it came to a point that I sat the customer down and I said, look, there's a lot of porn on this computer. And the customer, of course, I can't tell whether it was the customer or the customer's son, but they blame their son, which is fine. That could definitely be the case. I don't know how you were when you were a teenager, but we've all been there. And so I literally told the customer, hey, you might want to try out this area, or maybe find a site to pay for, because paying for a site is going to cost you a lot less money than me coming out all the time to fix your computer because you can't stay away from the porn, or whoever in your household can't stay away from the porn, you know. So it's crazy, but a lot of times it's a funny subject to bring up, but it is prevalent in the industry, and you just need to be aware of it. So again, if you have an aversion to anything like that, you need to just be careful how you approach the subject. Be careful, because you will come across it. Okay. And finally, and what I consider the most important step out of all these steps, I think that if you failed all 5 steps, but the 6th step you passed in my book, and that's document findings, actions, and outcomes. What I carry around with me to satisfy this step is typically a composition notebook. Composition notebooks are the little bound notebooks that cost you 99 cents at any office store or at Walmart, and a pen. And you may laugh and say, this guy's a technician. He's got an iPad. He's got a Surface. Why is he carrying around a notebook? Well, batteries die. Batteries die. Things happen, right? So I will typically carry around a composition notebook with me. And actually, when I'm at a customer's location, I'll write things down, like the serial number of the computer. I'll write down the model of the computer. I'll write down, the website I went to. If I got my computer Surface or iPad with me, I'll type down the URL I went to, or I'll do the research actually on my iPad rather than using the customer's computer to do the research, and I'll keep notes of where I went. And the reason why is because there's a high likeliness that in the future you're going to come across that issue again with another customer. It's nice to have your bag of tricks there that you can look back on and implement the same solutions. And it's keeping a knowledge base. Also, if you work for another company, this is a required aspect of troubleshooting, is to document what you did during the troubleshooting process, so that the next guy or the next technician that comes along can look up your ticket and see what you did to fix an issue. If they're having a similar issue, or they want to know the history of the computer. For example, if you work for a company that has a lot of technicians, and the company's getting called all the time to go clean up pornography or something on a user's computer, or the user has a ton of problems with their printer, how is that other technician to know if you don't document it? Documentation is the most important tool that you could use in troubleshooting. Always document. In classrooms, I would repeat this time and time again. Documentation, documentation, documentation. And guess what? In this video, I just did that again. Okay, now for the fun part. So when I first started in IT, I had a friend that was a technician that told me that the only tool that I would ever need in IT was a screwdriver, a Phillips screwdriver. That you could basically open any computer and take apart any computer with a basic screwdriver. Phillips head and straight head. And this particular tool is kind of nice because it's got you can use that as a nut loosener. This for case screws on the back. Anyway, that's what I was told when I first got in IT. When I was in high school, I was told this is basically all you need. I'm gonna tell you this. That was a lie. You'll find out that as you start out in IT, your tools just grow and grow and grow. What's kind of funny is I've progressed through my career in IT. I went from using just this to using a standard tech toolkit like this, okay, to now to needing additional tools like a punch down tool, to using multimeter, to using different things. But and I'm going to show you a typical technician toolkit, which is I'm leading to this. But I remember when I was told that this was all I would need. And what's kind of funny is as you go through your IT career, as you move up in rank, you start at this, you end up with all these tools, and then as you move up, you don't even need this anymore. It's kind of crazy. And in my current position where I work, I hardly ever use this anymore. I use my mind and my skill knowledge more than I use actual tools anymore. And I still use these tools, but I use them when I get called out by a client, a past client that still wants to use me as their technician, or I do things for family, or I do things for myself at home as far as IT stuff, and of course for these videos. So yeah, you start off at this, and then you're gonna see that your kit gets kind of big. Now don't be worried. As you get in the industry, you're gonna want to work for like a mom and pop shop to start with, and then they'll have the tools and you'll use their tools. But as you move along, you're gonna build up your tools that you use, like your toolkit that you take with you. So what I'm going to show you right now, and I'm going to expand upon it, but I carry these tools with me wherever I go, because I never know when I'm going to get a call from a client. I never know that, the call from work won't be the call that I will actually need these tools. So the motto in Boy Scouts, be prepared, definitely comes into play when you're a technician. So definitely something that you should always carry around with you is a screwdriver. I like these multi screwdrivers. I actually got this one for free from Nimble Storage. They're not sponsoring this video, by the way. If I could ever get them to sponsor it, it'd be awesome. But this tool is nice because it basically has your most used items in it, okay? Now granted, you're not going to open up a cell phone with these, or most laptops with it, but on a desktop computer or working with servers in a data center like I work now, this is a great tool for what I do. So definitely, what I'm trying to point at is the screwdriver. And if you think this is the only screwdriver bits you need, you got another thing coming. I got a kit like from Husky here that sorry about the phone tone. I'm always on call one way or another. But here we have a toolkit where we have the different bits, different sizes of screw heads, because Apple is famous for this, where they will actually use like little tiny screws, or they'll use Torx, or they'll use Allen wrenches, stuff like that. When you're in this industry, you think that all you're going to do is work on computers, and you're going to use screwdrivers and small Allen wrenches and small Torx wrenches and stuff like that. But the thing is I've gone from working on computers to where I've installed flat panel TVs for customers. I've installed mounting for their desktop computers, for mounting monitors for multiple monitors and stuff like that. So you'll find that your toolkit kind of builds with you as you go through the industry. So what we have here is we have a typical technician toolkit, and this one is kind of bastardized, meaning kind of added to it as I needed. And this is my minimums toolkit. This is a toolkit I keep with me all the time. It goes into my backpack. Most technicians, you know, will carry a backpack with them. But you'll find here it has your typical tools, like a wrench tool for getting case screws off, or even off of optical drives or hard drives. You got 3 different types of Phillips screwdrivers here. You have 3 different types of flathead screwdrivers. You have a solder iron, which back in the day when I first got in IT, the soldering iron was heavily used. We used to have these keyboard connectors called baby AT connectors, or baby AT connectors. Anyway, sometimes they would come loose from the motherboard, and we would have to literally solder them back into place. You don't see these used too much anymore. Sometimes if you're doing like custom cables and stuff like that, you may use this to terminate your ends. But with today's motherboards and the way they solder things together and how small things are, it's not likely that you're going to be using this heavily. So that's a soldering iron. It usually comes with most kits. You always have like a collection of screws. Either you're putting a computer together like a VMW bug, and there's always leftover parts, which is not a good thing, but or you bastardize old hardware and you steal the screws. For example, you got a piece of hardware that's no longer being used, so you'll steal the screws from that piece of hardware. Some of the other tools I have here, you see I have multiple of the screw holders and stuff in here, but you'll see that you have what they call a screw retriever, and this is just basically a claw to grab screws or parts that are hidden, and you just need to get to it. This came with the kit, so there's definitely better ones out there. I also carry with me this nice little magnetic wand. You definitely want to keep magnets away from certain parts of the computer, for example the hard drive. But when the computer's off and you're just trying to get that screw that's hidden in the corner of the case, these definitely come in useful. So there's that. I also have a little wrench in here, wire cutters, thermal paste for CPU. You never know when you're going to need that. That's definitely something that you should always have on hand, is some thermal paste. These are typically pretty cheap from, this is Husky, so this is from Home Depot. But these are fairly cheap. They work very nicely when you're trying to cut, like, for example, you're trying to cut zip ties. If someone went a little crazy with zip ties and cabling or what have you, always have one of these around with you. A razor knife, I guess. We also have chip pullers, chip inserters. These 2 tools, I haven't used them in like probably close to 15 years. We hardly ever use these anymore. In IT, we used to use chip pullers for the old types of BIOS chips. It used to be that you couldn't reprogram the firmware on a BIOS chip, and the only way to replace the firmware on the BIOS chip was to actually pull the chip out and replace it with a different chip. Also, in the older computers, RAM used to not be on individual sticks. They used to be on individual chips, and you would have to pull the chips, or you would have to insert the individual chips with a chip inserter. Okay, and what this would do is this would keep the contacts in line as you pressed it down into the board. We don't really use these anymore. Matter of fact, the most that this has been used in recent years, or even close to the last 10 years, is to show you it right now. Also in this kit we have tweezers. You never know when tweezers come in handy. Another thing that also works is thermostats. You see them used a lot in like if you watch a medical drama on TV and they're like pulling papers and stuff to the side and they got these clampers. Those are hemostats. Those things are awesome for trying to do like jumper blocks or anything like that. We don't really use those anymore. Most motherboards are jumperless. If you don't know what a jumper is, don't worry, we'll show you in a future video. But you know, different types that we have. Another set of tweezers here, and basically this uses a pressure to clamp down. These are nice because sometimes when using these, you'll be trying to get out of the computer and you'll loosen up and you'll drop whatever you're trying to hold. These keep positive pressure on it so you get it to the point you need to get it. So those are very nice. And of course, if you got a soldering iron, you probably want solder so that you can do something with that as well. So as you move up in your career, sometimes you'll need to terminate cable. Matter of fact, in the A+ exam, it does want you to learn how to terminate cable, especially RJ45, and they used to have you terminate RJ11. This comes in, a knife comes in very handy when you're terminating cable. I'll show you how to do that in a future video. I have other random stuff in here. For example, a USB extender cable. You never know when those will come in handy. So that's a typical kit, and this kit has survived me multiple years. This here is an adapter, HDMI to DVI converter. But yeah, this is typical. As you move on, as you go through your career, you'll have to add additional tools to your kit. And I found the following tools work very nicely for me. When working on laptops, I like to use a small screwdriver kit like this. This has varying sizes of small, very small Phillips screw heads. It's also this particular kit is heavy on the Torx heads. Torx heads kind of look like this here. I can get it out. So that's a Torx. Okay, so and you'll need those. Like Torx are required for opening up like an iPhone. This is also a nice extension for getting into tight places where you need to be able to turn the screwdriver, but it's in an angle where you can't get the whole handle in. These kits here you can find very cheaply, or not too expensive, at places like Home Depot or Lowe's or even online. There's another YouTuber, Linus Tech Tips. They typically on their videos advertise a very nice kit that I just haven't pulled the trigger on. As you see, another kit here. So you'll find that you build your kit as you go along. Now again, these are all in my backpack, basically anywhere I go. So we have an impact tool. This impact tool is for terminating like Cat5e cable for networking. Also, you can terminate on like punch down blocks. You can terminate phone cable and things like that. And I've had to do a lot of that in my career. It's kind of funny how you start in IT working on computers and you end up doing like networking and phone systems and things like that. Things that you never thought you would get into, but because they're technology, you end up doing them anyway. So this tool, obviously cut side, and then non-cut side, you always want to make sure the cut side is on the side you want to get rid of, not the side you're wanting to keep. We have a multimeter. These always come in very nicely, especially if you have a customer complaining about a computer that's not functioning 100%, shuts down on its own sometimes. That could be a sign that the power supply is going out. So sometimes you'll want to, not sometimes, but you'll want a multimeter so that you can actually test. I'll show you how to do that again in future videos when we're covering power supplies. But you can test the output of a power supply and determine whether the power supply is still good or not. Not only that, you can test connection cables going to your various devices on the computer. Also, you can test fuses and other like diodes and stuff like that on the motherboard for continuity if you think that something's burned out. So these work very nicely. You can get them as part of a kit. Again, this one I got from Home Depot and just works very well for me. If you get into networking, you're going to want a cable tester. This is a cable tester, and what this does is it tells you whether your pairs are wired correctly. So here I have this looks like a straight through. Yeah, this is a straight through cable. So if I go to the T568A, which is a standard for wiring a network cable, and I go to the same one on the other one and I turn this on, this will tell me that my pairs are correct. Okay, so if I have my pairs correct, I should get 1, 2, 3, 4. If I got my pairs incorrect, let's say I take this straight cable and I go to T568B and I connect, you'll see that this goes 1, 2, 3, 4, but this one jumps around. Now, if I'm looking to have a crossover cable, I've obviously done my cable wrong if I've done a straight through cable, because this is a straight through cable. All right, so if I want a crossover, this will also tell me if I got the right one. And a crossover is when you take a standard like this, the T586A to the T586B. Those are two different standards. I won't go over what's different about them now. I'll cover that in a future video. But if I have the right cable, and I so happen to have one here as a test, this is a crossover cable. If I plug it in and I have the right settings, I will get 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And this is not a crossover cable. I thought it was. I don't have one in here. But someone switched out my cables because there's supposed to be a crossover cable. But anyway, in this kit, usually they include a crossover cable and they include a straight through. So this one made a liar out of me, but that's all right. I'll just make a crossover cable later when I need it. So again, all this does is test and make sure that you got a clean basically just your pairs are done correctly. That's all this does. There's not much to it. And if you're doing other networking for your clients, which you as an IT technician in the field you will end up doing, you'll have to use something like this. This is a Fluke toner, and what this does is you put it on one end of a cable, for example on a phone line, or this can also be used in an RJ45 connection, and you turn it on, and what it'll do is it'll emit a tone. This is an emitter, okay, or a toner, and what it does is if you see this flashing, what it's doing right now is it's sending a sound through this cable. And I can take this on the other side of the cable and find what I'm looking for when I turn this on. Okay? And that's all it is. That's all it does is it helps you locate cables. Now in my toolkit, I have multiple of these and I got different brands of them because you can hear the different tones with the different brands. And the reason why I have multiple of them is when you're running cable, you don't want to have to run back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. What you typically want to do is connect a whole bunch of these with different tones. This one has 2 settings. So there's a solid and it does a solid tone. Okay. And it also has has the alternating tone. And so I'll have multiple of these out there so that I can hook them all up, and then I can go find my other end of my cable without having to make so many trips. So you'll find that, and that'll be part of your toolkit eventually. Trust me, it will happen. Okay, another thing that I like to carry with me, and it's important. What this tool does here is it tests for active power lines. And you got a green light here, and basically what the green light means is if you go to test the area and you don't find power, it will stay green, so that area is safe to work. For example, if you're having to like work with a power strip that overheated or something and is kind of melted, and you don't know if it's still got power supplied to it, this works nicely for testing power. I could take, for example, a cable that I have on one of my lights that I have in my studio and put this next to it, and it will actually make a tone. I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but that tone tells me that there's power running through that line, and you'll see that there's another light in here that's red. It'll turn red and emit a tone letting me know that that line is active, so I can protect myself from getting electrocuted. So that's very nice. And actually the multimeter and this came in the same kit. The next thing also came in the same kit. This is a outlet tester. Now the outlet tester is important because when you can connect sensitive devices like computers, you want to make sure that all your connections, especially to power supplies, are adequate and are wired correctly. I do not suggest that if they're wired incorrectly that you rewire it yourself. That's for a licensed electrician to do. But this is nice if you're trying to test an outlet. If you don't have this with you and you want to test an outlet, this will tell you by no lights that, hey, this outlet is not active, or it'll tell you, you see the light codes on the back here, it'll tell you if you don't have a proper ground, if there's something wrong. And so this tool comes in very nicely when you're testing. So that's about, well, one more, sorry. So I have one more tool, and it's very important too, and it's almost indispensable. It's a flashlight, obviously, to find screws that you dropped. Sometimes when you're working inside a computer case, it's dark in some areas and you need to see what you're trying to connect. Also, on the motherboard and on various components in the computer, there's identifying marks, and they're very hard to see unless you have a flashlight to flash on it to identify. So always carry a flashlight with you. I personally like the mag light, but what flashlight you carry with you is totally your preference and your decision. So that's basically it on the actual hand tools that I have that I take. I actually have a whole bunch more, but I only take them with me when I'm on a job that I absolutely need a lot more tools. Like wrenches and stuff like that, and trust me, you do sometimes end up using them. Some of the other things I have in my backpack that I always take to a customer's job site is I always take with me a network adapter for my Surface, or my laptop. I also have to use a network adapter, and this allows me to connect to the network if I'm testing connectivity or testing for connectivity on the network. For example, I have a customer call me and say that they have no connectivity to the internet and their network card's not working. Well, I can go in with something I know that works and then test it. And I can also use other tools like Wireshark and things like that, so I can probe the network for different ports being used and stuff like that if I need to do more troubleshooting on the network than just on the computer hardware. That's not really covered in the A+ exam, but it's something that you might want to know about in the future. This is an adapter. This is a dongle. You've heard me refer to dongles. This is also considered a dongle. And it's basically an adapter that goes from, for example, a USB port and converts it to network, or not converts it, but uses a chip inside of here to make this a network card, to a display port connection to a VGA. This is a dongle. This is what I was talking about earlier, where you connect to the VGA or the display port on, for example, the Surface, and go to a VGA. And these are useful because I don't know if you've ever used a Surface before, but the screen can be small, and if they got a bigger screen around, sometimes you want to use this so you can see better. So speaking of Surface, that's one of the tools that you take with you. You need to have a laptop. As a technician, you should have some kind of laptop or some kind of tool in that aspect, whether it be a Surface or a Lenovo laptop or a Toshiba laptop like I showed you earlier. It's very important that you have the proper tools with you, because you need to be able to diagnose. Not only that, you may be looking at, again, my iPad, and I do take this iPad with me to job sites because sometimes I use it for notes. Most of the time, when I'm in an area where I'm not doing a lot of activity, I use it for studying. This is what I use to study my books on. If I go into this, you'll see that one of the applications I have on it is the Q. This Q application is actually Safari Books Online. So if I click on that, you'll see that I'm in right now the A+ book, because I was reviewing it just to make sure that I was on top of how I was going to guide you through this video. So there's that. Of course, if I go back, there's Pluralsight. I've talked about that app before. And also, it's just really good for using for studying, or if I need to open up OneNote. There's Microsoft Tools here. Open up OneNote to take notes. There's another thing that I'm studying, the VMware VCA DCV. Always learning. In this industry, your mind is your tool, is your number one tool, and you're always learning. As Mark Cuban says, never stop learning. I'm sure he's not the only one to say it, but definitely it's something that you need to do. The other thing I carry with me, and not so much anymore because we've upgraded. I'm going to show you the upgrade in a second, but you always carry your tools with you as far as programs that you commonly, like installation disks and stuff like that you constantly have to work on other customers' computers with. So you'll see that in here I not only have Windows 10, but I have Windows 7, I have Windows Vista, I have some tools for hard disks here. I have Windows 2003. Just because you're in the newest operating system or the newest technology doesn't mean that your customer is kept up with you. Your customer could be using Windows 7 and need a reinstallation, or Windows Vista and need a reinstallation of the operating system. Well, if they have a poor internet connection, you better have that with you. See, I even have Windows XP here. These are all things that you should have with you, and just have the installation files, just so that if your customer is in a fix, you can get them out of the fix. Okay? As you see, this is fairly small. When it's fully occupied, it can be pretty heavy. So I did away with this, like I did away with tech books. This is what I use all of my tech research with now. I used to carry big, thick-ass books around with me, and they were heavy, and they, you know, you had to keep the page and all that stuff. Get with the times. This is it. This works. Okay, or the Surface. The Surface works great for that too. But we went from carrying wallets of CDs with us to now where I carry this with me. This is my external hard drive, along with various other flash drives. I have multiple cables for it. I also have like an audio to audio connection. But if you look, I have multiple cables in here just in case. But this is a Kingston transfer case that I kept from getting a solid state drive, and I put a large drive in here, and on this has all of my what they call OSI files. And the OSI files are image files that you can use on like Windows 10 to act as if it's a virtual CD. So on this, I have basically every operating system, the installation files for every operating system, every Microsoft Windows tool, whether it be Office or Visio or whatever. I have only the installation files. I do not have the license files on here. God forbid I ever lose this. I don't want to be tracked down by Microsoft because I gave out a whole bunch of their licenses. But on this disk also, I have the software that I typically use. For example, I have, if I'm working on a computer that's not Windows 10 and I'm working on Windows 7 or I'm working on Windows XP, I need to have a tool that allows me to access the image files I have on here. So I have a application on here that allows me to mount those items or those images so I can use them on a customer's hardware if needed. Okay, and of course, now that we don't use floppy disk drives and we don't use CD-ROM drives, these are heavily used. Always have a few of these around with you. I highly suggest, though, that you do not get free ones. Free ones typically come from vendors, and you never know what's on those things. And they could be pre-infected with a virus because sometimes vendors go to China for their supplies, and you never know what company's producing those things. I highly suggest you get like a SanDisk USB drive or iMation or something like that that is known to be good. Another good tool, yes, keep these around with you. Chemical error, never leave home without it. 9 times out of 10, when you work on a customer's computer, a customer typically thinks that their computer is an appliance. Okay? An appliance is different than a computer. And the reason why is because an appliance is like a cable box, right? A cable box, your cable company comes, plugs it in, and leaves it plugged in, and you never touch it. You leave it alone. If it dies, you call your cable company, you switch it out. That's an appliance. Your dishwasher's an appliance. The amount of cleaning you got to do on it is very slim. Your computer is a device that is very sensitive to dust. Okay? And we'll get into that in, again, future videos. But, yeah, always keep this around. Dust is bad. Dust is your enemy. You need to have chemical dust. And just in case your iPad dies or your cell phone dies, because typically the other tool that you'll need as a technician is a good data plan on your cell phone provider. Because sometimes when you go out to a client's location and they either have really bad internet or they don't have internet at all or they're having some other issue, you as the technician may still need to have access to the internet. So you'll have your devices, and even then sometimes you'll lose connection to the internet, so know your stuff. But I always carry with me a spare extra battery. This is a a nice little battery that if I forget my flashlight, it also acts as a flashlight. But this works great for providing you enough charge on your cell phone or your iPad to take care of your customer while you're on their site. So those are the tools that I use. Those are the tools that you should have with you. Your tool repertoire will build as you go, but this is the basics, and we'll kind of go from there. So that's pretty much it for this video. The only thing that I didn't cover in this video is different websites to go to. It's covered in the book, but not in this video. There are a few that I go to, but that changes depending, I guess, on my mood and the issue that I'm currently looking at. A couple that you might want to keep in mind, though, is Microsoft.com. Obviously to check for Microsoft issues and so on and so forth, and also Google. Google's a good research tool. You just need to be very careful on the information you get from Google as far as whether it's valid or not. There's some scammers that do post invalid fixes for problems, and especially if they ever ask you to download a tool to fix the problem, that's never usually a good sign. So make sure you validate anything that you research and get from Google. Sometimes asking a coworker or someone that's, if you're a tech level 1, asking a tech level 2 is usually a good idea, because they have more experience and can lead you in the right direction. I would also check out the CompTIA website in relation to the certification exam. Again, check out those objectives and make sure you follow along. Those objectives are your path to the actual certification. So you can't go wrong with printing those out and being prepared for it. So in the next video, I'm going to cover the BIOS, what the BIOS is in relation to what it does on your motherboard and what it does for your computer. I'm also going to cover EFI and the different technologies that we use in BIOS and basically your post technology when you're booting. So that will also cover CMOS and things like that. If you found this video helpful, please let me know by giving me a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to add them in the comments section of this video. I will do my best to answer them as much as possible. Otherwise, I hope you have a good evening. I plan on posting my next video no later than this Saturday, and keep a schedule like that from now on. Hopefully, I will be releasing videos every Wednesday and Saturday. Again, thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a great evening.